My name is Sarah Calloway. I'm 37 years old, and I want to share what happened the evening my husband's whole family gathered in a hotel ballroom, lifted their glasses in honor of him. While I was the only one there who understood that everything was about to unravel. I remember my exact seat that night, third from the end on the left side of the long rectangular table, not at the center where my husband Daniel stood delivering his speech. Not beside his mother, Margaret, who had taken the chair next to him almost before the staff finished setting the places. I was positioned at the side, which, to be truthful, reflected exactly where I had stood for most of our marriage. The event marked Daniel's promotion to regional director at Halcyon Property Group. After 15 years in real estate development, he had finally earned the position his mother had been proudly telling relatives about for at least 3 years, as though it were already true. Margaret rose before Daniel had even concluded his remarks. She tapped her glass. She declared this family has always recognized Daniel's true potential. Some may have questioned it, but we never did. She glanced at me while saying the part about some people doubting. It was brief, just a moment. But the table was intimate enough that those nearby noticed. I lifted my water glass and drank slowly. If you have ever been subtly dismissed in front of a group of people who acted as if nothing happened, leave a comment and tell me where you're reading from. Because that sensation, composed on the surface, but everything shifting underneath, stays with you. Daniel and I had been married for 8 years. We met when I was 26, working as a mid-level analyst at a land acquisition firm. He was charming, driven, and truly humorous in those first years. I supported him before nearly anyone else did, including, truthfully, himself. What I failed to see until later was that Margaret held a very clear vision of my role in her son's life. I was meant to be the background support, reserved, competent, appreciative, and equally unseen. She was never openly harsh in ways that were simple to point out. She avoided direct insults. Her approach was refined. She would inquire about my job with a kind of distracted interest, similar to how someone listens to directions they have no plan to use. Then she would quickly shift to discussing Daniel's career, his pressures, his promise, and the things he was giving up. His sister, Joanna, behaved the same way. Joanna had married successfully, which in Margaret's terms meant a husband with status and a clear income. And she had then quit working, something presented as a personal decision and never challenged. Joanna would watch me at family meals with a mix of sympathy and show. Once in the kitchen while I was helping with cleanup and she observed, she remarked, "I don't know how you handle such a busy career. I would be worn out." She said it kindly. She intended it as a way to diminish me. Then there was Daniel's younger brother, Callum. Callum had a minor role in the property sector, nothing high-level, yet he discussed the field with great confidence. He had begun bringing papers to family gatherings, proposals he called them. Concepts he hoped Daniel would review. He would pass them across the table with the confidence of someone who had long assumed ownership of that space. What no one at that table realized was that I had quietly protected Daniel's career for the previous 2 years. Not in some flashy public manner, but in the understated way women like me often operate, entirely unnoticed. Let me explain a bit earlier. 18 months before the hotel ballroom event, Daniel had made a significant misstep on a medium-sized commercial project outside the city. He had greenlit a zoning reading that his own team had marked as risky. He forced it forward anyway due to tight deadlines and a large commission. When the local council questioned the zoning, the entire deal nearly fell through. Daniel returned home that evening looking completely shaken. He sat at the kitchen table and stayed silent for nearly an hour. I worked in land compliance. I had done so for 12 years. I understood zoning regulations, council procedures, and resolution options better than most professionals Daniel interacted with. I devoted the next 6 weeks to addressing the issue with him, unofficially, from our kitchen table. I prepared the resolution plan. I located supporting case examples. I structured the council submission using phrasing I knew from experience would be well received. The matter was settled. The project moved ahead. Daniel earned internal praise for managing a challenging situation effectively. His route to regional director became much smoother afterward. He expressed gratitude to me. He did. Once in private, the night the approval arrived, he admitted he couldn't have managed without me. He never referenced it afterward, and I never raised it. By the time of the promotion dinner, I doubt Daniel even clearly recalled how near that situation had come to a different result. Memory works conveniently that way. We recall the success. We overlook the support structure. The dinner itself went smoothly, as these required celebrations often do. The meal was enjoyable. The talk stretched on. Margaret recounted an anecdote about Daniel as a child that I had heard her tell at least 4 times before, and everyone chuckled as if hearing it for the first time. Callum, midway through the main course, passed a folded paper to Daniel. He mentioned he had been developing something. A suggestion to integrate Callum into Daniel's new regional group in a consulting role. Daniel had not discussed this with me. I observed his expression as he reviewed it. He had not anticipated it. Margaret immediately responded, "It makes sense to keep it within the family." Joanna agreed. From my seat, I examined the document enough to see that Callum's suggested position closely mirrored a compliance guidance system I had actually helped create for Daniel's department 6 months prior. My name was absent from those records since I had assisted informally through Daniel, but my outline was present, my phrasing, my organization. The risk management process I had developed from the beginning. Callum was now seeking payment for efforts built upon groundwork I had provided without compensation. I stayed silent. I folded my napkin. I excused myself and headed to the restroom. I stood by the sink for roughly 3 minutes. I let cold water run over my wrists, something I do when I need mental clarity. Then I looked at my reflection and reached a private resolution. I was finished with being unseen. I had a meeting scheduled the following Tuesday with a woman named Dr. Elaine Marsh. She led the Independent Compliance Review Board for the Regional Property Authority. We had known each other professionally for 4 years. She had contacted me 6 weeks earlier regarding a formal advisory position on an upcoming regulatory assessment. I had been weighing it privately. I had not told Daniel because I had not yet decided. After the dinner, I phoned her Monday morning and agreed. The position was compensated, official, and included a title. More crucially, it provided influence. The regulatory assessment she directed focused precisely on the category of commercial developments that Daniel's division handled. Any company active in that area during the review window would need to prove adherence to the new standards, which I would help develop. I informed Daniel that same evening. Calmly across the dinner table, I mentioned I had joined a regulatory advisory board. He looked up. "What board?" I explained. He set his fork aside. "That covers our area." "Yes." He remained silent briefly. "You never mentioned being considered for that." "You never mentioned Callum's suggestion either," I replied. Not harshly, just matter-of-factly. He had no response. Over the following 3 weeks, I discovered details in my new position that explained everything. The regulatory assessment had pinpointed 3 problem areas in recent regional development work. One directly involved informal advisory arrangements, where unqualified individuals were placed in compliance-related positions without proper qualifications. Callum's suggested role fit exactly into that category. If Daniel had approved it and Callum started working in that capacity, the division would face a compliance risk during the review period with potentially major repercussions. I recorded this in an official memo as part of my advisory duties. It was not personal. It formed part of my regular review input. I highlighted the pattern without referencing any particular company. The standards clearly defined what would create a vulnerability. Dr. Marsh reviewed my memo during a meeting with 3 other board members. She looked across the table at me and said, "This is precisely the type of structural insight we required. This will probably form the foundation of the guidance paper." I thanked her and drafted the next portion. The guidance paper was released 5 weeks afterward. It was distributed to every major property company in the region. Halcyon's legal department identified it internally within 48 hours. Daniel phoned me from his office at 2 in the afternoon, something he rarely did. He said the legal team believes we might have a compliance weakness, something about advisory positions. I replied, "I'm aware." He hesitated. "You're aware? I helped create the standards." Another hesitation, this one longer. He returned home early that evening. He sat in the kitchen in the same chair from the night the zoning problem had escalated. I prepared tea. I placed a cup before him. He said if we had included Callum, we would have faced a formal compliance issue during a regulatory review window. I answered it would have been examined by a panel I serve on. He stared at me. Why didn't you inform me earlier? I recalled the hotel ballroom, Margaret's raised glass. Some people doubted. The expression in her eyes aimed at me. I said I wasn't certain you were paying attention. He offered no argument, which revealed something important. Margaret telephoned me 4 days later. The call was rare. She seldom contacted me directly. She would reach Daniel, and then Daniel would pass along the message to me. Her tone was cautious. She mentioned she had learned of my involvement in the regulatory efforts. She described it as sounding quite important. She inquired, quite specifically, whether the advisory structure matter would impact companies that had already proceeded with internal appointments. I responded carefully that I could not discuss review details with interested parties. I spoke in the same professional manner I would use with anyone. She paused for a moment. Then she said, "You have always been very committed to your career, Sarah." It was the first time she had ever begun a sentence with my name. I noted it. I replied, "Thank you, Margaret," and concluded the call. Callum's suggestion was quietly dropped the following week. Daniel informed me over breakfast. He spoke cautiously, observing my reaction. I nodded and poured my coffee. Joanna sent me a message that same day. It read, "Daniel is fortunate to have someone like you supporting him." I read it twice. Then I turned my phone face down and completed my breakfast. I want to be truthful about what followed because it was not a simple conclusion. Daniel and I engaged in a series of extended, challenging discussions over the next several months. Not heated ones. Quiet, thoughtful, occasionally difficult talks about the true nature of our marriage and whether either of us had really been engaged in it. During one, he admitted he had chosen the simpler route for years, that when his family required someone to undervalue, I had been the convenient choice. And he had permitted it because addressing it would have meant a conflict he preferred to avoid. I told him I understood. I also explained it was not something I could keep accepting. We separated in the spring, not in a dramatic fashion, not with early morning lawyers. We sat at the kitchen table, the same one where I had twice helped rescue his career without credit, and created a practical list of next steps. It was one of the most civil exchanges we had ever shared. I moved into an apartment in an area I had always preferred but we had never chosen, because it did not match Daniel's vision of suitable living for people in their position. It was more compact. The kitchen window looked east and received proper morning sunlight. I continued my role on the advisory board. The guidance paper I contributed to became a regional benchmark. Dr. Marsh highlighted my input in a published recognition. My name appeared in print independent of anyone else's. Margaret never phoned again. Joanna sent a card at Christmas. I sent one in return. I have not spoken with Callum. People occasionally ask whether I regret the years I spent diminishing myself. I have considered that carefully. I do not regret caring for Daniel. I do not regret the efforts I made, even the unrecognized ones. The zoning resolution, the compliance structure, the late hours at the kitchen table. That work was meaningful. It benefited actual people. It counted, whether or not it received acknowledgement. What I do regret is the silence I maintained regarding my own worth. Not the professional restraint which was occasionally necessary for strategy. The other type, the everyday silence. The way I remained at the edge of tables and never stated, actually, I helped construct part of what you are honoring tonight. That silence was not modesty. It was a pattern I had followed for so long that I had stopped questioning it. I question it now. I still work in compliance. It is not flashy. No one records it for social platforms. But there is real fulfillment in work that demands accuracy, persistence, and a complete unwillingness to ignore problems when they exist. I lead a small group of junior analysts. I tell them at the start of each new review period that our responsibility is not merely to identify mistakes after harm occurs. Our responsibility is to create an environment honest enough that harm is prevented. I tell them that documentation is not red tape. It is safeguard, not only for the company, for yourselves. They note it down. I think of my father when I say those words. He was the type of person who kept copies of everything, not because he distrusted others. Because he knew quality work deserved proper documentation. He was correct. Mine exists, quiet, detailed, and completely my own.